From 1971, this is Sounds Natural.
Today our guest is the distinguished actor whose voice has in a way become the voice of, among others, this famous character.
Let us walk in the beautiful woods, Watson, and give a few hours to the birds and the flowers.
It would be elementary to say elementary. Sherlock Holmes, welcome to Sounds Natural, Peter Cushing.
Thank you very much.
From which of the Conan Doyle stories were those lines taken?
Black Peter, they're down in Surrey, looking for one of their usual troublesome spots.
Very appropriate for this programme, and I'm sure you chose them deliberately with that in mind.
Yes, I did.
Now, the pick of the BBC Natural History Record Library is yours for the asking as we talk during this programme. Anything you'd like to hear, just say so. When did you first become interested in the wildlife around you?
I suppose it was when before I went to school, it was my brother who introduced me. He had always wanted to be a farmer, the same as I'd always wanted to be an actor. And it was indeed he was 3 years, is indeed still 3 years older than me. And it was his interest and love of things natural that drew me along with him. And he taught me a great deal. I don't know, I'm not an ornithologist as such, it's just that I love nature and one observes it.
That makes two of us.
Yes.
How did this interest first come out? What did you first do? You collect birds' eggs?
Yes, we did. This I think most children do. Fortunately, we got over the collecting of eggs fairly soon, because I think it's awful pity that you take one egg out of a clutch and say there's a clutch of 4 and you've taken one and only one comes out. That's, it's just one extra loss. But we did collect, and I believe he still has his collection, which he used to blow. I was never very good at blowing the eggs. I always sucked and got the whole lot as an extra breakfast. But later we gave up the collecting of eggs and collected, when we found a dead bird, we'd collect the skull and the leg and a feather, which I think was a better way of collecting.
Did you have any feeling of guilt at that time, taking birds' eggs?
No. It wasn't guilt, but my brother was very strict about this. He knew that it was wrong, we never ragged a nest or anything like that. We were most careful. Where he learnt this from, I don't know. Which came first, the egg or the chicken?
Do you remember any particular species, the eggs of which you collected?
Yes, we got the biggest egg, and the smallest, we got the mute swan and the gold crest. And we had a kestrel.
Tell me about the kestrel's nest.
Oh, it was only that it was one rare occasion when our dear mother came with us on one of our sorties, and my brother had sighted this kestrel's nest on they don't make a nest, it's just a little ledge with a few bits and pieces down a cliff. It wasn't very far, it was a quarry really. And he had pre-planned this. He was always the chap who held on to ropes with me on the other end, and he'd let me down over the cliff to visit this kestrel's egg to see if there were enough to take one for our collection. And my mother saw me disappear over the edge and said, "Oh, my boy," and fainted. That was all. But she revived and we got our egg, and there it is in the collection yet.
I wonder if you heard this sound when you took the egg.
Oh, that's marvellous, isn't it? Yes. Yes, he or she was there doing that to me while I was dangling on the end of my rope.
When did you give up collecting eggs?
It was fairly soon, really, after we started collecting, because we suddenly, I think there was something on the wireless even then saying, look, do be careful about taking the wild flowers and the wild birds' eggs, because if you do, they're not going to be there for other generations. And this struck home to us very strongly.
Did your brother become a farmer, by the way?
Yes, he did. So he achieved his ambition the same as I achieved mine.
But didn't you ever want to farm? You were obviously interested so much in the countryside.
It's a strange thing. I always loved the country and the countryside, but I never wanted that side of it. I've always loved the animals and birds and flowers. No, as far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be an actor. How to get into it, I didn't know, because there was no connections in the family. But eventually I did. Too long a story to tell you about.
That was at Worthing, wasn't it, the Connaught Theatre?
Yes, indeed, yes. I got into the which was marvellous for me, because we had always been down to Worthing for our holidays when we were at school, and I loved the Sussex Downs and the surrounding countryside. And so it was lovely to start in the profession I'd always wanted to be in a place I had always liked.
And it must have given you an opportunity to get out onto the downs, because marvellous bird sounds out there on the Sussex Downs.
Absolutely wonderful. I know that one which I would love to hear, if it's available, is the lapwing and the curlew particularly.
The curlew, of course.
Thank you. That is the most lonely yet soothing thing. There's something incredibly soothing. It's almost saying, it's all right, it's wonderful. And yet that wonderful solitude, I think it's something for the soul there, I think.
And to follow, the lapwing.
Tell why it's called the peewit.
Did your wife share your interest in the countryside, or did you introduce her to it?
Bless her. Yes, I think any partnership, if one person is interested in something which the other hasn't come across, that other person will take an interest, and through that interest, and indeed a love. I had always liked music, but not to the extent that Helen taught me about music, and I was, in a limited way, able to help her with what knowledge I had. For instance, identifying birds, because we live in the country by the sea in Whitstable, and she was wonderful always at looking after people, and she always looked after the birds, putting food out for them and water on the mantelpiece, on the windowsill.
Tame birds.
Yes. And of course, she knew of my love of them, and I was able to help her to identify. And during that very, very bad winter, I forget which one it was, but it really was a dreadful one, and even the sea froze, which I thought was impossible.
63,
I think it
imagine.
was.
Yes.
I mean, I thought salt didn't freeze, but there were waves actually frozen at Whitstable. You could literally walk on the frozen waves. And we had the most wonderful selection of birds in the garden, because normally you put something out, and either the blackbird or the robin will come and take that and drive the other fellow off. But here they all were, because they were all starving. And my darling Helen, and I was so thrilled, she recognised a redwing, and for some years after we had redwings in our garden, which was wonderful.
Is there any particular bird which brings back happy memories for you, for both of you?
All bird noises bring back happy memories. I must say now there's an added sadness for me, because they were once shared physically, but they are still beautiful sounds, and Helen adored them. And she loved, in a way, the simple, unsophisticated. In fact, there was a lovely, if I might just quote there, I read a book recently by Ernest Raymond called A Georgian Love Story, and in it he quotes from a poet called Henley: "The nightingale has a lyre of gold, the lark's is a clarion call, and the blackbird plays but a boxwood flute, but I love him the best of all." That's lovely summer evenings in the sunset, isn't it?
Or the other time, just after a shower of rain.
Yes. Yes, you're so right.
He'll find himself a high perch, won't he, right on the top of a tree.
That's right, yes. He goes on one of our willows.
What about your own interest in birds? Did you sort of put up bird tables and things like this to encourage them?
Oh, yes. Particularly when we moved down to live in Whitstable, which was the first time we had a house, tiny house, but with a comparatively big garden where one had the opportunity. My brother and I used to, but I'm talking now of latter years of my interest, which has remained all through the years, and been doubled by Helen taking such an interest. Oh yes, indeed, it was through, as I think I said earlier, through putting up the little bird tables and the bird boxes that it attracted them, and we were both able to look at them together and watch their habits and hear their noises.
And the blue-tit, I'll bet, was one of the first to come along.
Yes, indeed. I'd love to hear that rather angry cry. It kept us from having our tea sometimes in the garden. When you're in situ with that noise going on, deafening it can be from this minute little object.
Yeah.
And you think of a buzzard with a wingspan of what? So, I think 3 feet at least, with that little sort of mew, you know.
Yes, of course, we tend to hear the buzzard from a distance. I
Yeah,
suppose.
of course, because we did on Bodmin Moor when we were down in Cornwall. You see, way, way above us. And, of course, as you say, it's way up, isn't it? Yes. Yes.
It seems, in talking to you, Peter, that what we would describe as the homely birds, the one that congregate in your garden, have particular appeal for you.
Yes, I think this is because I love home. I always have. And home with Helen was something out of this world, and I mean that literally, absolutely wonderful. So being much of a home boy, one naturally saw the things around you more often because one was more often home. But I used to go for many walks, and when I'm studying a part, I always do take the part out on long walks into the country, along the seashore, to study, and sometimes that can be made more difficult to study. I find the hardest part of my work, because that's literally getting the words learnt so you can get rid of the script and get on with the more important part of acting it naturally.
Whenever you're out of this country, and obviously your work must take you away quite frequently, do you get terribly homesick?
Dreadfully homesick. It becomes not just homesick, it becomes an absolute idée fixe to get home. I mean, 2 feet, literally 2 feet. I take size 12 in shoes, but 2 feet out of England, and I'm so desperately homesick. And always, particularly, I never minded going away since 1942 when I met my dear wife, because she always went with me, and where she went, that was all I wanted. I still missed home, but it was all right being with her. But before that, when I was in America and war had broken out, I was desperately homesick. And the one thing that, the noise that was the most nostalgic for me, and still is to me the most English noise, or the most British noise, are rooks cawing in a rookery. I don't know, I might be quite wrong, but seems to me there's no other country in the world where you get a sound like this.
That's a real old raucous rookery, isn't it?
Yes.
And did you notice the chiff-chaff there in the background?
Yes. Oh, that was what that little chap was. Yes. He does almost say chiff-chaff, chiff-chaff.
And the little tiny bird, once again, who seems to be able to peek through all the other sounds. That was recorded at Selborne, the home of Gilbert White, the famous Gilbert White, Reverend Gilbert White. I'm going to play a bit of a trick on you now. I'm going to play a recording which is very atmospheric, but I'm wondering if you'll be able to recognise some of the birds that can be heard. I know it's terribly difficult to pick out bird sounds and bird songs. I'm bad at it myself, particularly when it comes to warblers. But just try this.
Well, there's the good old rook, of course. There's church bell. Would this be at Selborne? Or what? There's a turtle dove in the background.
Yeah.
Wish they wouldn't all speak at once. The rooks have won. What a lovely sound. What a beautiful sound.
That was in the village of Selborne in the month of May.
There's something about certain people's voices, and indeed pieces of music, that are so indicative of the country. And there's one I would dearly love to hear if it's available, and I'm sure many listeners would like to hear it. It's C. Gordon Glover's voice, which is seems to ring of the country, coupled with that lovely signature tune for the countryside this month, the month in the countryside.
Stagnant this wintry gloom, Afar the farm cock bugles his qui-vive, and towering elms are lost in mist. Birds in the thorn trees huddle a whist. The mill-race waters grieve. Our shrouded day dwindles away to final black of eve. Beyond these shades, in space of air, ride extraterrestrial beings by, their colours burning rich and fair where noon-sun valleys lie. With inaudible music are they sweet hoof bells, soft lapsing cry.
See Gordon Glover.
That's, if I was cast away on Roy Plumley's Treasure Island, no, Desert Island,
Desert Island,
I would have that. I think it's absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
When you were talking about your work before you went on the stage, I got the feeling that you weren't exactly happy with what was going on in the countryside, even in those days. What are your feelings today?
Well, they hadn't changed as far as that is concerned. Loving the countryside as one does, it isn't just that one loves it for the beauty and the relaxation it gives one, but I think it's of all importance. You asked me earlier about taking eggs. Well, I suppose instinctively my brother knew that it was wrong to take an egg, because if you think, oh, that's just a common article, say a house sparrow's egg, so you can take all you like, or the primrose is a common, or the bluebell. One day they will become rare, because there's plenty of those, so you just pull, and once you pull the bluebell out, it's lost. And I think this is a pity, because things left in their natural state, it gets people out into the country, which is good for their souls. It gets fresh air into their lungs, and they can see things in their natural state, rather than collections of things which go into museums or into, say, a boys' playroom, where eventually they'll be put in the dustbin. I don't know enough about it, but I'm sure there are people in the position to see that the countryside is left for generations to come. Because once our countryside goes, you'll never get that again, ever. And to me it is, and having had, shall I say, the good fortune, it's not good fortune because I don't like going abroad. I go abroad with my work. And I've been abroad many times in many different places. And I don't think it's just because I happen to be born English, although my dear wife says I bleed woad when I'm cut. I adore Great Britain, and there's no countryside like it. It's incomparable. And all I'm trying to say is I do think the countryside not only should be, but must be preserved, because even those who perhaps don't care for it, they would miss it too if it wasn't there.
Let's come home, where obviously your heart lives, and will obviously always be, Peter. You're home now on the North Kent coast, yes?
Yes.
Whitstable.
Yes.
How long have you been there?
We've been going down there since the war, and we've lived there now for about the last 10 years.
And that's where you get the sounds, the marvellous sounds of the Thames estuary.
Yes, yes, which is, and our house is literally on the beach, and this is where my walks start from. And extraordinary thing happened once on one of my walks. I didn't have a script this time. Perhaps I'd
between
the
scripts
part already,
yeah.
Between scripts. Sounds as though I'm always working. I hope I'm not showing off. But I saw a turnstone flying in the most peculiar way, with it had a cockle on the end of its nose. So I gave chase to this bird, because it was only going in short hops, faster than I can go, and I must have chased it for a good mile and a half, and gradually it was getting more borne out than I was, and eventually I did catch it, because it was too exhausted to go, because it couldn't open its beak at all, and I threw my coat over it and had great difficulty in getting this bivalve off. It must have been extraordinary that it must have just been, turnstone, turning the stone down, got its nose in, it was clamped down on it. And I had to take it to a marvellous doctor, Dr. Nesfield, who is in Whitstable, and has a garden full of cages to house all birds, that he's sort of almost the local veterinarian surgeon. And any bird that I find in distress, I take to him. And he indeed had to use some form of instrument to get this cockle off the bird's beak. And another time I found, I think it was again a little turnstone, in great trouble. He'd got a fish hook in his tongue there, and with all the not the string, what's it made of today? Fish line, plastic.
Nylon.
Nylon, yes, dreadful, because it won't break. So I took that along to him, and he performed this little delicate operation. He had to cut a bit of the tongue away. And I remarked, well, I did the holding of the patient, and he did the operation. And I remarked upon the absolute faith this bird had in both of us and the patients. And I said, surely there must be some pain there. And he said, well, to a degree, of course, but he said they've learnt to accept, you see. And he did his operation, and the bird, I took it back to the sea and let it out of my hands, and it stood there for a considerable time and then fluffed its wing. The first thing it did was go and have a good wash, which I thought was absolutely wonderful. But I must say there's a great deal to be said for living along an estuary. I wonder if we could hear some of the sounds.
Let's hear the turnstone.
Yes, yes.
A marvellous bird, the turnstone, to watch, isn't it, too? Such a busy bird.
Yes, yes. And when they take off in flight, they seem to change to another bird, don't they? Because all their colours come to view.
Which other birds do you see? Which other waders do you see along the estuary there?
Really, one's so lucky. I practically see them all. I mean, farther out in the marshes, of course, you get the heron. Then along the shore, you get the curlew and the whimbrel, and the bar-tailed godwits, oyster catchers, dunlin, little stints, knots, and the one, they're also favourites. I do love the red shank, and he's got such a beautiful voice when he's just talking to himself. Here it comes. I won't interrupt it because it's too beautiful. Wonderful solitude again, like the curlew. But when he's scared, and he's almost like the man who cried wolf, isn't he? Because I mean, he'll be scared at 200 yards off.
Are there any species which used to come along in great numbers which aren't quite so numerous these days?
The ringed plover is one. I think that could be much to do with. Don't think I'm blaming you, because everyone should have holidays, but people have come much more to the isolated parts of the beach down there. I think this has driven the ringed plover away from the immediate vicinity of the beach where it used to breed, but it is still there in great numbers on the Isle of Sheppey and farther along towards Faversham way, where people don't go quite so far. Well, here he is. That also, if I might say, reminds me, that noise, going back, way back to the times when my brother and I did collect eggs, as a birthday present for one or other of us. Our parents took us down to Rye and Winchelsea because we wanted to find a little tern. We did want a little tern egg for our collection, and we spent all day, because I think we'd gone on an excursion, so it meant you got a certain train there and you had to get a certain train back, so we only had a limited time, and we spent all this time walking along a stone beach, because as you know, they don't build a nest really as such, it's just stones and things, and the eggs are so camouflaged. And anyway, it was getting, in the end, his father called and said, look, we must go home now, boys. We saw him sort of waving mad. So we rather disconsolately turned to go home, and almost met father, and I suddenly saw a yolk of an egg, and I'd kicked a stone, not meaning to, and it had cracked open a clutch of 4. So we did not take, was a broken one, so we took a photograph instead. That the 3 were left. But that was quite remarkable, I think, with all that stretch of pebble, that just one stone kicked and should have broken poor little egg.
It shows how well camouflaged the eggs are.
Oh, yes, incredible, because there's no, even straw, it was this little indentation in these pebbles.
Here's the call of the little tern.
Oh.
You must find many oiled birds and possibly dead birds in your walks along the beaches and the estuary.
This is a very sad thing. Indeed, I do. Some of them naturally have died of natural causes. Some I find just completely exhausted. But all these birds I take to Dr. Nesfield. And once I found, again, I imagine it must have either been blown there by gales or migrating, because it's certainly not a bird we have down there, was the black-throated diver, which was in a parlous condition, poor thing. But I picked it up, and of course the first thing it made for, with that huge bayonet-like beak, was my eyes. I imagine it's because it's the brightest thing of a human, isn't it? And they're made for those. So you have to be awfully careful if you pick these birds up. Hold their neck rather like you do a swan's. And I took it along to him, and he did cleanse it, but unfortunately he always reports to me on the birds I take to him. This one did not survive. It was too far gone. And of course, once you've got all the crude oil out of a bird, you've got to put the natural oil back, haven't you? So they're goners.
It's a very, very difficult business.
Yes.
And that black-throated diver has a thrilling ghostly cry, hasn't it, on its breeding locks up in the Scottish Highlands?
I'd love to hear it.
I reckon that's frightened many a lonely traveller at night.
Yes, it really is a most incredible sound, isn't it?
Were you trained to use your eyes as a youngster?
Not consciously. I think, again, it might have been through my brother taking me into the countryside. I've always been very lucky. I've got pretty good long sight, I'm told, and this, of course, is very helpful. That wonderful occasion, I don't know, I would love to mention it, because I think it's very rare for our part of the world. I was on one of my walks about 3 or 4 years ago along the beach, and I saw, of all birds, and this is a sea salter, very near Whitstable, a snowy owl. And I recognised it, absolutely no mistaking that it was a snowy owl. And although I must have been a good 100 yards, the length of Twickenham rugger pitch, that's how I judged distance from it, and it saw me and I saw it, but it didn't move. It just stood there horizontally as opposed to uprightly looking at me. So I got a little nearer, and it was wonderful. It's the first time and the last time I've ever seen one, very large, of course, as compared with the little owl or the barn owl or the tawny. And then it was seen off by a couple of black-headed gulls. It didn't care, it just flapped off lazily, but it was such a wonderful sight to see.
You were very lucky, because it was most unusual, surely, for a snowy owl to be seen so far south.
It was, indeed. I think it must have been, I don't know, would it have been migrating or just...
Certainly on some movement of some sort, yes. Because they breed annually, don't they, on Fetler in the Shetlands.
Oh, that's
They've been up there since 1967.
Yes.
We've got several recordings made by Magnus Sinclair, who lives up there, of the first pair to breed in the Shetlands.
Well, I never heard one, so I'd love to hear that.
Yes, there he is.
Almost laughing, isn't it?
Thank you, Peter Cushing, for your vivid pictures of your travels and for letting us hear some of the sounds.
Well, thank you very much for asking me.
The haunting call of the curlew. What a lovely sound. From 1971, the actor Peter Cushing was talking to Derek Jones in Sounds Natural.